they were constantly talking to me about like you really need to slow down on the drinking. Like it was I couldn't watch a movie without trying to find a way to turn it into a drinking game. My entire life was alcohol. I couldn't if I was out with friends and I ordered a drink, I was counting down the minutes trying to make myself make this drink last long enough that I could order another drink without looking like an alcoholic. Um,
Welcome, everybody. It's Katie with Thrive Alcohol Recovery. And today I'm really excited to introduce you all to Ashton. Today, we're going to tell Ashton's success story with the Sinclair Method. And I'm excited to have you here because we were just chatting. Like, we've known each other for years. We were kind of meeting up on the TSM meetups when I was running that several years ago before I launched Thrive. So when I was asking people to tell their stories and I saw your name pop up, I was like, Ashton, it's so nice to connect with someone who's been, doing TSM for a long time. So I just want to thank you, first of all, for chatting with me today.
yeah, and I'm glad that you're doing this. I think it's really important for folks to see success stories and see how different everybody's success story can looks because it can be really easy for folks to just feel like if this isn't clicking for me right away, then it's not going to work. And that's just
Exactly.
not the case.
Yeah, and you know it well because you were involved in the TSM community through your journey. I don't know, maybe you still are plugged in to some degree, but that's exactly why I want to tell these stories is because I'm just one person and I had one experience and I love to bring others like yourself on just to hear, the challenges you had and the successes and how long it took you and what your struggle with alcohol was like. So, I want to just dive into your story if you don't mind. Would you mind beginning
Yeah,
with, your history with alcohol and what it is that led you to realize that perhaps you had some type of alcohol use disorder?
sure. Um, so addiction runs pretty strongly in my family. So I didn't really even start drinking regularly until I was probably 22 because I was so adamant that this was not going to be my story. This wasn't going to happen to me. But because addiction runs in my family and my brain is just hardwired for that, once I did start drinking regularly, just socially, I really started getting those endorphins just hard. Like it grabbed onto me and it didn't let go for years. I, at my peak, um, I had gone from like I started drinking just like whatever mixed drinks, and then I went to the cheapest beer that I could find, and then moved on to wine because I was an adult and adults drink wine, but poor adults drink box wine. So I would go through probably a box and a half to two boxes of wine every week. Um, it was a lot. And I would, over the years, I would kind of take these breaks from drinking because I wanted to prove to myself, like, I don't have a problem because I can stop anytime I want. And I could stop. I would go, anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. But then inevitably, when I would start again, there would be this huge binge. And I'd wind up hungover for 4 days and then just I'm right back into the thick of it. Um, Probably, gosh, I don't even know how many years ago it was now. I had finally I had been hearing it from my friends for a few years at that point that I really needed to kind of get a handle on things, that I was drinking to excess. And then it was just really starting to click for myself. Like I'm drinking more than I want to. I don't like feeling like I can't walk past the liquor aisle at a grocery store without having to veer in. I don't like feeling like I can't drive past this liquor store that I would pass all the time on my way home from work without having to stop in to get something. I didn't like feeling like I needed it. So I tried Alcoholics Anonymous. I was not a fan because I'm not a religious person, um, and I resented the whole setup where it's, if you have a drink, it sets you back at zero. I didn't like that mindset, because in my mind, progress is progress. If someone's gone 10 years without taking a drink and then they have a drink, even if they go on like a weekend long bender, that doesn't erase the 10 years. So AA wasn't for me. I tried a few other just kind of like moderation management style meetings, but nothing was really working for me because I'm too good at talking myself into doing something. Um, so on a whim one night, just kind of out of desperation and not expecting it to turn up anything, I Googled cure for alcoholism. And the first link was Claudia's TED Talk, which I'm sure if anybody were to just go onto the TSM page, the TSM Warriors page on Facebook, and just Google Claudia's TED Talk, the exact quote, you'd probably come up with 200 posts right away. Um, but yeah, I watched that TED Talk probably 5 times in a row that first night. Like it just clicked for me. And it was another 6 months or so before I finally got up the nerve to actually take action and talk to my doctor about it. But yeah, he was super open to it. He had never heard of it being used that way. Um, he obviously knew what naltrexone was, but like other doctors, he had been taught to use it with total sobriety, total abstinence. Um, but I just kind of brought the literature, and he read through it while we were there together and agreed that we would kind of try it together, and he would monitor to see how I was doing and make sure that it was working the way we needed it to work.
Wow. That is so cool. Yeah, I think so many of us learned about this treatment through Claudia's, viral TEDx talk. So I am eternally grateful for that, and I know you are as well. I wanted to go back briefly, if you don't mind, because you said something
Mhm.
about like when you were drinking heavily. It sounds like your friends did an intervention type thing in you or with you. Can you talk about that? Like if you want to, I'm just curious
Mhm.
to hear what that was like, because I would imagine that that would have been a little bit difficult.
Yeah. So it was less one sort of big stage intervention and more just um, I was not a good friend when I was in the peak of my drinking. And my two closest friends, we were living together when I was kind of drinking the most heavily, and they were constantly talking to me about like you really need to slow down on the drinking. Like it was I couldn't watch a movie without trying to find a way to turn it into a drinking game. My entire life was alcohol. I couldn't, if I was out with friends and I ordered a drink, I was counting down the minutes trying to make myself make this drink last long enough that I could order another drink without looking like an alcoholic. Um,
Yeah, you nailed. Sorry,
and
I'm just like,
yep,
okay, the exact same thing. I did the exact same thing.
yep. Um, so yeah, and like that's my friends are pretty perceptive, so they notice that stuff. Like when you kind of know what to look for in someone, you can see them sort of sitting there doing the mental math and getting really quiet, not really engaging so much. So they noticed that and they would talk to me about that a lot too. And for a long time, I would just get really defensive because I would know if I had a drinking problem. Addiction runs in my family. I would see it. And the problem was I did see it and I just had blinders on. I was totally in denial.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting what you said too, that it runs in your family and kind of in your early 20s, you're like, that's not going to happen to me. And I honestly had the same mindset as well. Like addiction is something that happens to somebody else. But when you start to experience it yourself and realize like, oh no, like I'm more addicted than I thought I was, or I can't moderate or abstain, like, okay, I guess I did develop this addiction. And I guess I'm curious, do you feel like you developed it by accident or unintentionally? Like, I feel like that's what happened to me. Yes, I was the one putting alcohol to my mouth. Alcohol was addictive, but I don't think I appreciated how addictive alcohol was and how prone I was to developing it. I thought it was something that I could kind of rein in at any time. So I'm curious, what was
Mhm.
your experience like with that?
Yeah, it was definitely very um like it just kind of came on out of nowhere. Like I went from almost never drinking at all to going out with friends most nights of the week. Um, I'm a trans man, I'm queer, so for in the queer community, for a lot of folks, the gay bar, whatever local gay bar, is the only place that they can find community, that they can just like be around like-minded people. And that was the case for me. I grew up in a very small town. So I would go there most nights of the week. And then just because that's where I was, you drink while you're there because that's what you do at a bar. And it went very quickly from ordering a beer to sharing a pitcher with friends to drinking most of the pitcher by myself to ordering a pitcher just for myself.
Yep. Yep. It's crazy, that progressive slippery slope. And before we know it, we're like, okay, this is way beyond what I originally started out as. So yeah, okay. I appreciate you highlighting that because I wanted to just understand a bit more about your history with alcohol. So,
Mhm.
how long would you say you were struggling with problematic drinking before you found the Sinclair method?
Oh, I want to say I started really drinking heavily when I was 24, 23, 24 is when I really started drinking, um, and getting drunk every time I would drink. Like I wasn't someone who could have a few drinks and then just be done. Um, and then it wasn't until 2018 that I found the Sinclair method. Um, more years than I would like to admit between me being 23 years old and 2018, but it was quite a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so when you learned about the treatment, I know you kind of talked about that you were drinking maybe up to 2 boxes of wine a day. I'm sure you were going out socializing and drinking
Mhm.
there and maybe not always tracking. So, what did your maybe like a week in the life look like for you before you started the treatment? Just so people can understand and maybe relate, like, okay, that's how I'm
Mhm.
drinking as well. Or, yeah, what was it like for you?
Yeah. So around the time that I would say that my drinking was at its worst, which was probably the last like 6 months to a year before I found TSM, I I wasn't really going out so much. I was because I was too ashamed to drink the way I knew I was going to drink if I started. So I started drinking alone at home, and I would get home from work. I'd go right into my room. I shared an apartment with two other people. So I'd just go right into my room and I'd start drinking wine, and I'd be 8 glasses of wine deep. I'd basically just drink until I blacked out and hope that I woke up in time the next day to go to work and start it all over again. But that was 7 days a week.
Wow. Yeah, and that isolation too, just like you said, you can't drink as much or at the pace that you want to oftentimes, unless of course you're drinking with others who like to drink at your level, which for me, like I had a group of friends like that, but
Mhm.
it wasn't always the case. So it was almost easier just to isolate and drink by myself at home. So I completely relate with that.
Yeah.
Um, so you started the method in 2018, is that correct?
Yep. I'm pretty sure it was 2018. Yeah.
Okay. So what did you know? So when we're recording this, just for people to be aware, in early 2024. So that's going on about 6 years ago now. So we're going to
Mhm.
talk about kind of, a little bit later what life looks like for you now. But I
Mhm.
wanted to hear a bit about when you first started the method, what was your initial reaction to the medication and the treatment? Were you, the fast
Mhm.
responder, or what was it like for you?
Yeah. Um, So the very first night that I tried it, I had told my friends that I was going to be doing this, the two friends that I was living with, and they were both super excited about it. They're like, this makes perfect sense. This seems like it could really work. I'm super proud of you for doing this. So they decided that we were going to have a night where we would drink together because we hadn't done that in a long time. So I took my first ever Naltrexone and we ate dinner, and then an hour went by and I finally started drinking. And that first night I felt kind of dizzy and a little nauseous. It can make you feel a little bit off for a few days, but if you're drinking regularly like I was, it doesn't take long for it to just get in your system and you don't feel it. Um, I went from, I want to say 60 to 65 units of alcohol a week because I'd been tracking for a while before I started. That cut in half in the first week. Um, it wasn't just a perfectly straight decline from there. Like it would kind of, each week, my drinking would spike up higher than it had before the previous dip, if that makes sense. Um, but it was still a trend down. So I would just have these, it would go up, down, lower than it had been before, up, higher, but not quite as high, and then down lower than it had been before. So every low was the new low. Until I finally reached a point after about 9 months where I was regularly having probably one glass of wine a day, um, 5 or 6 days a week. Like there would usually be 1 or 2 days a week that I would skip, but it had been like that for close to a month where it was just that. And I was kind of at my wit's end, like what do I need to do to just kind of get over this hump? Like I feel like I'm not addicted to it anymore. It doesn't feel like it has that same draw, but I still didn't feel ready to kind of stop that one glass of wine a day. And I didn't want to be stuck there.
Mhm.
Um, Total sobriety wasn't my goal, but if I'm gonna have a glass of wine every day, I want it to be my choice, not because that's the thing that I do. Um, but then I just kind of got lucky that I had some friends of mine who traveled a lot and they had a dog. They asked me if I would come dog sit, and I went and I was there for 10 days and I didn't drink at all when I was there. And then after that, I did a full dry month and found absolutely no struggle with it. And it was literally just that breaking that habit, getting myself out of that environment for a week and a half that just, that was it.
Ashton, I'm so glad you spoke to that because I think there's a lot of people that can be in a really similar place where they've been on the method for a while, they've made tons of progress, but they still feel kind of stuck. Like, okay, like you said, how do I get over that hump? And it's amazing to me how many times I've heard other stories like yours where they switched up the environment or they just decided to take a week-long break or they went on a vacation or they moved or something like that. And just that like switch made everything made them see everything from a different perspective. And the alcohol free time was easier than they thought it was going to be. They were able to go longer without drinking. And it was just kind of like you said, getting out of that environment and switching up the habit. But it's incredible how much we can kind of be plateaued in that habit because you've been on the medication for 9 months. Clearly you were,
Mhm.
at the extinction point, but the habit was still kind of having its control over you, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like you said, it wasn't this pull, but it's like, okay, this is my nightly routine. This is what I do.
Mhm.
Um, but wow, that's really interesting that just one little decision to go dog sit and get out of your environment. Were you planning to take that 10 days off? Were you not allowed to drink when you were dog sitting? What happened there?
No, I just decided that since I was going to be getting into a different environment, that seemed like a great opportunity to try and see what it felt like.
Yeah.
Um, because I very much so had the attitude that if I felt a pull to drink, then I should just take an naltrexone and drink
Mm.
because we don't, we learned from the years of me not doing TSM that trying to resist those urges doesn't actually do anything to make them go away.
Right.
Um, so I wanted to see if it was really habit or if I had um, convinced myself that I had reached extinction and that there was still just a little bit of that pull there that I was just misattributing to habit.
Mm.
Um, so I decided that I would take the 10-day break, and if it got too hard, then I was fine. I had my naltrexone with me. I knew that I was ready to take a pill if I needed to, and thankfully I didn't wind up needing one.
Wow. So was that difficult for you during that time or like cuz I think sometimes toward the end especially it can be difficult to understand the difference between just a thought about drinking because it's 5 o'clock and I always open my bottle of wine right now versus a genuine craving, which like what you said, it doesn't really go away. You can't just resist that craving. It keeps
Mhm.
talking to you. So what was it like for you if you can recall? I know it was several years ago,
Yeah,
but do you remember like those first handful of alcohol free days and how difficult it was?
it was definitely difficult. Um, it's it takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to differentiate between a craving and habit. When a craving has been just a part of your life so thoroughly, it can be really hard to figure out, do I have this habit because I still have the craving, or is this just my routine? It's not necessarily something that you can know just off the top of your head. I think you have to play around with it a little bit. And that's what I was trying to do on like my days off. I would kind of try to really pay attention to what thoughts were running through my head, what I was feeling in my body, if I was like feeling, because for me, sometimes the cravings, I would get almost like my skin would crawl with the need for it. Um, so I just was trying to be really aware and focused on myself and what I was experiencing during those times because I wanted to see, is this hard to not drink, or is it just continuing a pattern? Um, I don't know how much sense that made.
No, it totally made sense, and I think that internal kind of awareness and inquiring of yourself of, in like the traditional recovery world, they're like surf the urge, and I'm like that never worked for me. Like the urge never went away. Like, but with
Mhm,
with naltrexone, we kind of get those thoughts about drinking, but to your point, it's like you kind of ask, like, what's really going on there? Is my body reacting and like telling me I need a drink, or is my just getting this like thought repetition or this thought habit coming up because it's 5 o'clock on a Friday and I always drink at this time? And then just
mhm,
giving yourself that space with the help of naltrexone to explore that further and think, okay, if this, urge is still there in an hour, then maybe I know it's a craving. And if it's not there, maybe I was just hungry and I, needed an ice cream cone or something like that.
mhm,
So it is an important, I think, part of the journey where perhaps people can get stuck in a habit there because like you said, you were having those couple alcohol free days a week before you took the break, but you were feeling stuck. So like, had you not
mhm.
gotten out of that environment, who's to say, when
Yeah,
you would have had that breakthrough on the method. Would you agree with that?
yeah, 100%. It's, I mean, I'm sure that I eventually would have gotten there, but I mean, it could have taken another 6 months easily because I'm very good at just kind of falling into a routine, and that's my routine, and that's what I do. Um, and it's that wasn't a level of drinking that I was uncomfortable with. It wasn't a level of drinking that I felt like I needed to be ashamed of. So it would have been, I think, easier for me to just let myself sort of convince myself, like, okay, this is just what kind of drinker I'm going to be now. This is my new relationship with alcohol. I set out doing this, not knowing what my relationship with alcohol was going to look like at the end of it.
Yeah.
Maybe this is just it. Um, but I am glad that I did get out of that environment and just get that shift because my relationship with alcohol now is very much so, I might have a half a glass of wine at a family holiday event. Um, Beyond that, that's maybe one time a year.
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
don't, can know this because, I went through the method, but I imagine that the other times that you're not drinking, it's not from a mindset of like, oh, I can't drink or I wish I could drink, but I can't. It's like, from my perspective, I can drink anytime I want to. I just
Mhm.
like have no interest in it, so I don't. Is
Same.
that what it's like with you? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's, I mean, there's every family event that we go to, there's usually wine there. Um, I can drink whenever I want to. We have wine that we keep at home. I can open up a bottle if I want to anytime. I just don't want to. I would rather have a Diet Coke.
Me too. Same. Like, it just sounds so much more refreshing.
Yeah.
So you were kind of like an average case, I would say, of like the timeline to extinction, the 9 month. That's about how long it took me as well. And kind of you were one of those people, it sounds like, where you're drinking like week over week, month over month, was just kind of reducing. Like you said, not a perfect
Mhm,
linear reduction, but like overall the trend, it was going downward. So,
mhm,
what were some challenges generally, if you want to chat about that, that you may have experienced on the Sinclair method? Like, was compliance an issue? Was habit change or coping skills or social situations? Were there challenges for you on TSM,
mhm.
that whole journey?
Yeah. Um, so compliance definitely wasn't an issue. As soon as from the very minute that I decided to actually take this to my doctor and ask about getting started on it, I was bought in. I knew like I unless this completely does not work for me, I will never drink again without taking a naltrexone first. So that was for me easy, done. I'm a rule follower to a fault sometimes. So this is the rules with TSM. Um, I think the challenge for me was navigating how open to be with who, um, in regards to me figuring out my own drinking and how much I was going to drink, and um, whether I wanted to drink in social situations or how to monitor that. Like there were some people that I was just totally 100% open with, and then there were others I still had a lot of shame about the fact that I had even gotten to this point in my life. Um, so I didn't want to talk to them about that. I didn't want them to know this about me. I didn't want that judgment. I was judging myself enough. I didn't need other people adding that on. Whether or not they actually would have was irrelevant to me. Um, but yeah, I think that was probably the biggest struggle, was just figuring out how open and vulnerable I feel comfortable being, because there was also the fact that I wanted to be able to share this with other people. I, I see a lot of people still to this day who are struggling with, just total sobriety. And you're struggling needlessly. There are things out there. GSM isn't the only other path to recovery. And I just really try to tell people like this is what worked for me and this is the science behind why it worked for me. I can give you information that you can take to your doctor if that's something you're interested in. I can give you information just so you can learn more about it if you'd like to learn more about it. I think it freaks some people out because it feels like they're just giving themselves permission to drink. Like it's just an excuse, just a thing that you're saying you're doing so that you can drink. Um, yeah, so I was trying to navigate my own fear of being vulnerable with my own desire to help other people to not suffer the way I had.
Yeah. Completely understand. And I think that's one of the cool things about the method is like, but it can be between you and your doctor. Like, I didn't tell anyone I
Mhm,
was starting the treatment because I didn't know if it was even going to work. But there does come a point, the longer you're on it, where the people in your life are clearly seeing changes in you, where it's like, I don't know if you're anything like me, but I was the one that was like the last man standing at parties, and I was down to drink till 2 or 3 a.m. and close the bar down. And when I wasn't doing that anymore, everyone's like, what's going on with you? And so I had to talk about it at some point. But it was
mhm,
honestly one of the more difficult parts of the journey to be open with, hey, I really struggled with alcohol and I use this medication that helped me to cut back. Like, I had to have those conversations, and they were not
mhm,
comfortable, but once I did it, it really felt like ripping off the Band-Aid, and it was like a relief. But then there was this other part of it where I had to become somebody who, or in a way change my identity, I guess, because I was the life of the party before. I was the one that was always down to drink. And that's what people expected of me. And when I wasn't doing that anymore, I was like, well, who am I in this type of situation? So I'm curious for you, because you kind of talked about going out to bars and drinking in that way, but also drinking home alone. How did it impact your social life at all? Like, did it change
Mhm.
the dynamics of that? Do you have social anxiety like I do? I'm just curious what that was like for you.
Um, so I mean, I'm naturally an introvert, and I think that drinking turned me into an extrovert. Just I would go to the bar and close it down, whether I went with friends or whether I went by myself. There was a local bar where I became good friends with the bartenders who worked there all the time, and I would just sit there for from 5 or 6 p.m. until well after the bar closed at 2 because I would just keep hanging out with them after the bar closed. Um, I completely lost my train of thought.
No, no. It's funny you were saying that because I feel like our drinking, like, or the style of how we were drinking is so similar. Like everything you're saying, I can just relate with. So I
Mm,
just wanted to share that. But the thought was around like how your social, reality changed going on this
mhm,
method.
yeah. Um, so once I was drinking less and feeling like less of a pull to drink, I got more to a point where if a friend invited me out for drinks or if a friend was having a birthday party, something like that, I would go. Um, I'd have no problem having a few drinks or not, however I felt that day. But I got a lot more comfortable just sort of spending time at home, not always necessarily by myself. I also got more social with my two roommates who I was living with. But I kind of got to reintroduce myself to my friends who weren't super heavy drinkers. They got to kind of see more of the side of me that they hadn't seen for quite a few years. The just smart, funny, lovable guy who's not just constantly thinking about when I can get my next drink and not getting so drunk that it's no longer fun to be around me because now you have to worry about if I'm going to throw up everywhere or try to go off on a walk and get lost in the city or something. So it's the friends that I still had a closer relationship with. They all really kind of liked that change in me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how you kind of, as you lose interest in alcohol, at least this was true for me through TSM, you become a better friend because you're not, like you gave the example at the beginning of our conversation where it's just you're focusing on your drink and pacing yourself and how can I drink slow enough to keep up with everyone else here so they don't think I'm gonna, or I'm an alcoholic or I look like,
Mhm,
I'm trying to get drunk. So when that's just not an issue anymore, it just, you can be more present with the people around you,
mhm,
recognize the people who are your real friends versus those that are just drinking buddies and so on. But I wanted to ask about that because people often have that concern around, what social life looks like, if alcohol is no longer an issue. And I think for most of us, the changes on TSM are gradual enough that we can kind of navigate it
mhm.
as we go. But there are some changes that need to be made for sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's just being compliant can only take you so far.
Yeah.
It's, there might be a few people for whom that's it, that does it for them. But for the majority of us, that's just like the first step in a longer process of sort of, like I said, reintroducing yourself to yourself and learning how to be a person again when that person is someone who's not only focused on drinking. Like it's wild.
It's so wild. I love what you said, reintroducing yourself to yourself, because it really does feel like you're getting to know yourself on a level that perhaps you haven't known for years or decades, because you've
Mhm,
just known the intoxicated drunk version of yourself, or the
Yeah.
person whose life revolved around drinking.
Yeah.
That's actually something I wanted to ask you, because you said compliance will only get you so far. And I totally agree. Like, it's crucial. I wouldn't be where I am today without naltrexone and TSM. It saved my life. But there was so much more to it than just taking the pill. And I realized that a few months in, when a lot of emotions started to surface that I'd been numbing for so long, and habits started to surface that I was struggling to break and things like that. So what else, generally speaking, did you do besides just taking the pill and waiting an hour to drink? Like, what else contributed to your success and freedom from problem drinking and got you where you are today?
hmm Um, well, one of the biggest things that helped me was having community. I would go to the TSM meetups. Um, I was pretty active in the Facebook groups. If I was struggling with some aspect of something, I could post a question there and I would get a ton of really helpful responses. This is what worked for me in this situation. Um, or just, I don't have any suggestions, but I'm here for you if you need to talk, whatever, things like that. Just kind of being in community helped a lot. Being able to talk about what it felt like and what the process was like and what was working and what wasn't with other people who understood the whole process was really important for me. And also I was in therapy. So while I was doing this work outside of therapy, I was also um, sort of examining what my relationship with alcohol was and what pulled me to it and what the resistance was for so long that kind of prevented me from trying to do more things before I finally found TSM. Um, and just kind of helping me process as I was learning who I was without this being the primary aspect of my personality.
Yeah, it's a lot of that internal work that you can't really see on the outside, but it's really vital to success. Like, I realized how much my identity was so intertwined with the alcohol and my relationship to alcohol and my day-to-day life. Any waking moment that I wasn't working or sleeping was like, when can I drink? Okay, I'm drinking. Okay, I'm recovering from
Mhm,
drinking. It was just this huge part of me. And naltrexone helped me with like the craving aspect and to kind of let go of it that way. But there was like 40 plus hours a week that I was spending around alcohol. And I'm like, what do I even
mhm.
like to do if I'm not drinking? Like, who
Right,
am I? And that's
right.
scary. Was that scary for you at all?
Yeah, it was very scary for me. Um, Trying to figure out like what if I'm not getting blackout drunk in by myself in my bedroom, how do I spend my evenings? What do I do? And there was a lot of boredom while I tried to figure out like what do I want to do? I don't have the bandwidth to be social every single night of the week, so I'm not gonna like go out with friends to keep myself from being bored. So it was a lot of like finding different crafts that I liked to do. Reading. I binged a lot of TV shows. Um, but yeah, it's interesting going from being a person who all of your friends so thoroughly associate you with alcohol that they start buying you gifts that are alcohol related, like a pair of socks that says, if you can read this, get me a glass of wine, or like it's those gifts are hilarious when you're in it and you're drinking and you're like, yes, this is so hilarious. That's so me. But then you look back on it and you're like, I don't like that that's what they associated me with. So it was kind of wild, just sort of learning how to be a person when alcohol wasn't my personality. Like, how am I going to spend my evenings when I do go out with friends? What are we going to do? What do we talk about? I don't know. It was like being a socially awkward middle schooler all over again.
So, oh my gosh, yes, it so is. So did you find that you navigated that like gradually, day by day, because I think when we start on the method, that kind of seems daunting. The thought of like 2 weeks alcohol free or even a few days alcohol free, like what? But you I think with this method you can navigate it gently and like scenario by
Mhm.
scenario. But I'm just curious, is that how it was for you? Because you were drinking like 8 glasses of wine in a night, and then by 9 months in you were drinking 1 glass. So that's like some significant changes that happened over that time and how you're spending your evening. So is that just a gradual process?
Yeah, it was definitely gradual. Um, I had already been in therapy for years, so I'd gotten pretty good at just taking things day by day in general. That's that's a lesson that kind of took me several years in therapy to learn how to just like I don't have control over tomorrow, but I do
Mm,
have control over today. I don't even necessarily have control over 5 hours from now, but I have control over right now. Um, so being able to just focus on like how am I going to navigate today? What am I going to do this evening? And not letting my brain go down the just doom spiral of what am I going to do for the rest of my life while I'm not drinking. Like it's,
yeah.
yeah, that is daunting. But if all you're looking at is what am I going to do tonight, that's a much easier ask for your brain.
Yeah, it's so true. So, I mean, you were spending every day, every evening drinking before, but now you drink like 1 day a year, about you talked about. So, what does life look like for you today? Like a comparison of before TSM and now. It like tell us what your life is like and how different it is.
Um, my life is like night and day. I went from working just a bunch of retail jobs and one retail job after another to I work in financial aid, and I am working on my master's degree in social work. So I work full time. I go to grad school. I have an internship right now. I'm married. We have a dog and two cats that are all adorable and monsters. Um, so yeah, my life is spent just sort of being busy between work and grad school and internship, but also really just trying to be present in the time that I do have to just spend with my wife and spend with our pets. And um, we try to go to dinner, go out to like visit different family members as often as we can, just to kind of keep that connection. So it's having my life be so focused on just self improvement and connection compared to just when can I get the next drink, and I'm actively holding a drink right now, but I'm already thinking about when can I get the next one. It's night and day feels like not a big enough contrast.
Wow, I got chills as you were describing that. Yeah, that's incredible. And what you said too, kind of working retail jobs, I relate to that. I would just work jobs that I know I could show up to super hungover, or maybe even have
Mhm.
drinks on my lunch break and nobody would notice. It was just surviving, just to kind of keep my alcohol drinking and that cycle going. But now, I mean, for you, it just really sounds like you're living your potential and you're going after things that you want in life. And clearly you're well enough to do that. You're not hungover anymore, and you're just living the life that I think, you would want to live. And to do that in a place where you're not, fearing a relapse might happen tomorrow, or
Mhm.
stuck in craving cycles or things like that. It's an incredible testimony to the power of TSM and the power of you as well to commit to it and see it all the way through to extinction and beyond.
Yeah, I'm grateful every single day that I found TSM. I could not be where I am. I wouldn't be married to my wife. I wouldn't be working on my master's degree.
Wow. Yeah. It's sometimes scary to think about where you'd be today if it didn't change, right? Sometimes I have that thought and I'm
Mhm.
like, oh dear, that's a scary thought. So I did want to ask you, I forgot earlier, because you kind of talked about how around the 9-month mark you were drinking like 5 days a week. It sounds like about one drink. And
Hmm.
that's a pretty healthy standard relationship with alcohol, but it still sounds like it felt like alcohol had some control over you. But
Hmm.
then you were able to take that break, and now fast forward several years, you're drinking once a year. So I was just curious to clarify, when you reach that extinction point at about 9 months, what did your drinking look like in the years between, then and now? Because there's been several years. Were you always drinking once or twice a year, or what did that look like?
Yeah. Um, I would say in the year after I reached extinction, I I would drink maybe 2 or 3 times a month.
Okay.
Um, I've not been drunk a single time since I reached extinction. I have no desire to ever drink that much again. Um, and I've not had any trouble since reaching extinction just having a glass of wine or having a couple beers. Um, so it kind of steadily kept going down even after I reached extinction, where I would drink a couple times a month, and then the next year I would drink maybe once every few months, and then for the last few years now, probably since 2020, 2021, it's been maybe one time a year.
Okay. Wow. That's
Mm.
awesome. And just like, because people sometimes don't understand what extinction feels like, since it really is like a subjective experience, like,
Mhm.
when you're there, what were some markers for you to know, like, okay, I've reached extinction?
Um, I don't think I really knew that I had reached extinction until after I took that 10-day break to go dog sit. Uh, I had been drinking at about the same level, about 5 drinks a week, um, for about 2 months, maybe a month and a half. And I remember just kind of like I would post every few days on the TSM Warriors Facebook page. Like I've been this long just kind of drinking this much. I don't know if this is extinction. I don't know how to tell. But how do you know? And everyone just kind of said the same thing. It's only you know. It's do you still feel addicted to alcohol, or do you no longer feel addicted to alcohol? And that's not necessarily an easy yes or no question. Um, so I really like it was on my mind. Like I thought I maybe was at extinction, but I couldn't figure out why then I was still consistently having 5 drinks a week without, like, it didn't feel enough like a choice, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it wasn't until I had that 10 days just dog sitting and not even thinking about having a drink while I was there that I was like, okay, yeah, that's extinction.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, a simple way I like to describe it is like just regained control over alcohol, whether you're drinking or
Hmm.
not. And like, where you were drinking, I mean, that's a pretty low level, but it's like it sounds like you still felt compelled to have those drinks. It wasn't like
Hmm.
freedom of choice, like, yeah, I'm gonna take a few
Yeah.
days off, no big deal. And I think that's one thing where someone can know they're at that extinction point where you don't really care if you're drinking and you don't really care if you're not drinking. It's not this like compulsion that's beyond our control.
Yeah.
So, and I think taking that break, like getting that a little bit of distance from alcohol, can help you really see it more clearly, because it sounds like you were just stuck in that habit.
Yeah. And it was really like I felt control over it in terms of like it was easy for me to not have another glass of wine after that first one. I didn't have any desire to keep drinking after that first one, but I still had that first one. And
Yeah.
I was kind of struggling with figuring out how much of a need it was versus I just want this because it sounds good because
Yeah.
I enjoy wine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's so cool about this method is people can decide, like, if that was your personal goal, like, I want to drink 5 days a week and have a glass of
Mhm.
wine after work. Like, perfect. Like that's a
Right.
perfect TSM goal. You can choose,
Hmm.
but for you, it's like you were like ready to have more than that. It sounds like that wasn't for you personally where you felt satisfied. Where I've met others who they are satisfied at that. Maybe they're having two glasses a night or something, and that's where they want to be. But that's another thing that's cool slash sort of like intimidating with this method. It's like you actually decide the type of relationship you want to have with alcohol, and those goals can change over time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of TSM is that it gives you that choice over what your relationship with alcohol is going to be. Like prior to TSM, I didn't have any real agency over what my relationship with alcohol looked like. And then with just the simple matter of taking a 50 milligram pill before I had my first drink of the day, doing that gave me like it was this catalyst for giving me back that control and giving me the ability to decide for myself, do I want to be a person who drinks a glass of wine at the end of the day? That's fine. I was ready for that to be what my relationship with alcohol was, but I didn't feel for myself, I didn't feel enough like I was fully choosing that. So if that was going to wind up being my choice with alcohol, I don't know exactly what metric I would have used, but I think I would have just had to do some more sort of self exploration to figure out what to do or how to feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Really well said. This has been such an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on things. Before we wrap up, what advice, you've gone through this method, you have years beyond extinction now, you've maintained a completely balanced relationship with alcohol. What advice do you have for others who are watching, whether they're just learning about the method, maybe they're just getting started, or maybe they're even feeling stuck on the method? What
Yeah.
advice do you have for people?
Um, well, my biggest piece of advice is compliance, compliance, compliance. If you aren't able to buy in and really commit to taking the pill before you drink, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Um, the second piece of advice is find people that you trust and feel comfortable talking to about it. For me, that was the community that has kind of built up around TSM. But it could be your friends, it could be your family, it could be your spouse, your significant other, your therapist, whatever. Just find someone to process this outside of yourself with, because that helped me a lot. And then don't don't be hard on yourself if your progress isn't linear, because progress almost never is. To find someone for whom their TSM journey is just a straight linear decline with no spikes, that's going to be like one in 1,000 maybe. So
Yeah.
just really give yourself grace and trust the process.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much, Ashton, for the time today. I really enjoyed chatting with you and hearing your story and just hearing an update since I haven't talked to you in a couple years. It was so good to see you. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just thank you for doing this, and thank you for sort of continuing to do the good work with TSM and helping people navigate it and getting the word out so that more people can find their way to it. Because I just really think that this should be a standard of care. It should just be an easy thing for any doctor, any primary care physician should be just have this in their toolbox ready to go for someone who comes in saying, I drink more than I would like to.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I commend you also for just telling your story because I know you were talking about how that was a challenge for you, just being vulnerable and like discerning who to tell and how to talk about this. So you coming on to tell your story, I know it's going to reach people for years to come, honestly. So thank you.
Thank you.